Today I want to talk about 3 different ways that are pretty cool to actually play emulation on the budget. However, we're having over here the HP ProDesk, then we're going to be having another ProDesk, also an HP, and then we're going to be having the EliteDesk. It's not a glitch in the matrix, but they're actually similar but still different. So let's talk about it and which way is the best way. So first let's talk about what are the differences. You can actually see over here these the new models with this very nice silver and black, the full black version, and then we're going to be having another ProDesk, or this is actually the ProDesk that has also the 2 colors. So we're having 2 models, but we do have different variations. So when you're going to be looking at the connections, we're going to be having some differences over here. So the ProDesk only has 2 USB at the front, we're having the jack for the microphone and the headphone, and the on and off switch. So the older version also has let's say actually an interesting USB-C, where this particular model doesn't have that anymore. But we do have fast port at the front. Same goes for the other model. And of course we're having the EliteDesk. And this is also slightly different with having a USB-C port over here, 2 fast ports at the front. And we're going to be having the jack and of course the on and off switch. At the back we're finding quite some differences. So first of all we're going to be having the Intel one. This is the silver, the complete black Elite. So both are Intel chipset and this is the AMD version. The AMD comes with an extra display port. So all of them will actually have enough USB ports at the back, only this has just a different color. So we do have fast ports at the back, so it's convenient if you want to use an external drive. So what is kind of cool that both of the Intel ones utilizes an old school VGA connection. So let's say if you have a setup, an old arcade, that you want to use VGA, yeah, if the software supports it, the hardware also supports it too. So what is interesting with the teardown, you can actually see with over here, this is the AMD version, these are the Intel ones. So the AMD version don't have the bracket. I think it's still compatible because there is a ribbon cable with a converter to SATA and power for connectivity over there. So it's missing, so that's one thing I'm guessing you can buy separately. So it would be freaking cool to have a built-in 2.5-inch drive. The configuration of these things are almost the same, what you can see over here with the cooling. You can remove the cooler if you want to, and underneath we're going to be finding dual channel memory. And yeah, if you don't want to use an external hard drive, we can actually use it in these machines and just slide it in. The question remains why I am such a big fan of these things, because overall I think they have some really cool, let's say, compact models, and when it comes to the overall quality, I am really pleased with it. Let me know in the comments if you have any experience with these devices, but I think it's such a cool way to actually have a compact way. If you want to do an arcade build, or want to build yourself a game system, you can do this fairly easy with this HP ProDesk and EliteDesk. But let's do a quick overview of all of them, because when you're going to be looking at them, there are some differences, and most importantly, the power of the CPU-GPU combination, because Intel and the AMD version does have a lot of differences. And all of them will need an HDMI converter if you want to use an HDMI connection on your television. They're really expensive. You can buy them from AliExpress for a couple of bucks. I will not spend too much on them, but yeah, they're a plug-and-play solution. And you can just plug them in and have some fun. So for the first one, let's do a quick overview of the ProDesk. This is the HP version ProDesk, and this is the older version. So what you're getting is not only the external part, but it's particularly when it comes to, let's say, the internal part, when it comes to the specs. They're older models, so also the GPU is getting a little bit older, but also when it comes to the CPU. But let's do a quick overview of what you can do with it. In Batocera drive, the first thing that we need to do is disable the secure boot, otherwise it will not boot up into Batocera. So let's do that first. The menu can be different of the model of mini PC you're actually using. But as also when you want to get into the BIOS, some require to use F9, Dell, and also in different Dell, having the Dell over here, but also done with the numpad. And in my case, I just needed to use Escape. So double check always if you're not getting into the BIOS. Go Google the model number or the model version product you're having, and it will explain how you need to get in there. But let's take a close look at the menu, what we're going to be switching out. Depends on what kind of mainboard or BIOS inside of the machine itself. So where can we actually find it? So in this case we're having Advanced, where we find the secure boot configuration. In here we have the legacy support disable and secure boot enable. In here we need to disable it, and when we've done this we need to save and go all the way back. And the reason why in this case we can just go save changes and exit. Yep, I want to. And then we're going to be booting up into the Batocera image. but it can give problems when it comes to Windows itself. So that's the reason I'm not a big fan of, let's say, the dual boot situation. And if everything seems to be working, you're having the Batocera boot up screen. Depending on how big your hard drive and the files you've installed, depending on how long it will take for booting up the firmware or software itself. So one thing you need to take into consideration if you have a problem with the boot up screen. So it shows the Batocera, it shows the first boot up screen, but if it doesn't show the second screen, that is due of, let's say, sometimes the compatibility of the firmware. So what you need to do is getting an older PC or just download the latest version of Batocera to know for sure that it will boot up with your mini PC. Okay, another issue I've noticed with some of these mini PCs that they have a built-in, let's say, speaker. So how you need to fix that, normally you're going to the output of the audio configuration, but in this case we didn't have a lot of options. So what you need to do is basically leave that audio if you want to, but next thing you need to go into the audio profile. And here we're finding all the different ways you can actually go to. Here we can switch between the speaker inside the thing. Can be convenient if no speakers inside of your monitor. But it's one of those ways you can actually mess around with it. So by the way, an option you don't have with every single mini PC. But that's actually how you need to fix that issue when it comes to some of these, let's say, mini PCs with a built-in speaker. That's such a weird thing. But how is it with the emulation? There we're going to be a significant difference if you're looking at the price range of a Super Console X mini PC you're buying now. So Batocera also comes with so much more possibilities when it comes to emulators. Think about GameCube and some other like ones that will run slightly, maybe sometimes way better, depending of course how much power you're basically having when it comes to mini PC. All the way from the 8-bit, 60-bit era, think about the Mega Drive or Genesis, to PlayStation 1 that runs on the cheap devices just fine. But where I just want to focus is N64. That is one of those devices that runs absolutely horrible on most of these cheap boxes. So, and again, take consideration, if you want to run PlayStation 2 and 3, we do need to have a lot of power. And that is the thing with these, let's say, i5s we're having over here. We have maybe enough power. That's what we're going to be finding out. But another thing I just wanted to check out, it is also interesting, if you want to go into the game list, we have the option even to upscale. So going to the advanced option by holding the A, here we have the option to mess around with some emulators, but also with the internal resolution. And we're going to be looking into some of them, of the emulators like Sega Saturn and Dreamcast, to check out how will it run on high resolution, because it is something we cannot do with the same, let's say, overall quality and price when it comes to some of those, let's say, cheaper game boxes. Pressing start, let's take a close look at some other things. System settings. So what actually are we running? So this HP ProDesk comes with a very nice temperature to begin with, 32 Celsius idle. Next up, this is an x64 one. Model number is the 8169. Linux version. But what is interesting, that this comes with an i5 6600T CPU running on 2.70 GHz. It's a quad core with a max frequency of 3500. So, and the graphics API is going to be in OpenGL ES 2.0 with the Mesa Intel HD Graphics 530. So not saying the best specification out there, but for the money, hey, we can't complain. So let's start off with some Panasonic 3DO. And the reason why is very simple, is because most of these, let's say, cheaper game boxes has problems running this. But with a mini PC of this, let's say, powerful, let's see, M5 in the inside, we have no problem whatsoever, and we can just run it without any problem. I've been looking into the upscaling. There's not like a massive things you can do with upscaling. I think the original resolution was 640 by 480, and that's the only thing you can do with it. But I think it's pretty cool to just experience a couple of those hidden gems on here. But when it also comes to like the devices like handhelds, we have beautiful bezels, and I think it's one of those awesome ways to play. Of course, we can remove the bezels if you don't like these, but you don't need to buy a mini PC of this caliber to actually play these, let's say, basic Game Boy Advance games. Like I mentioned before, they run just fine actually, because on the cheaper game boxes we had the same result with just native resolution, with some bezels, without bezels, we had no problem whatsoever. So again, if you just love these, let's say, basic games, you can do it with a cheap game box, or with even maybe with a lesser and cheaper mini PC. So one thing you need to take into consideration, so when it comes to N64, sometimes we need to switch between emulators if you have some problems, but the overall performance on Native Revolution is so much better than your typical, let's say, EmuElec cheap box. And I think that's absolutely a cool addition if you just want to enjoy some old school N64. Even all the way up to 4 players, it's possible. I will switch to my buttons. That was always like the question, how did they map it? But with Crazy USA runs perfectly on this. I've noticed with some cheaper game boxes we had so many issues, and I think it was some time ago that I made this video saying that at the end of the game boxes era, and that's just simply because it is. You know, mini PCs has so much more to offer, and especially when you're looking at the prices, you're actually just paying now for them. And with games like Cruis'n USA run fine, it's just great to revisit these games. And what is also kind of funny, so let's do a different game of the N64 era, but this time let's put in rendering resolution of full HD. Okay, my buttons are completely messed up and I can hear the audio is just not running like it should be. But beside those problems, the game seemed to be running just fine. Oh yeah, they completely messed up. But when you're looking at this overall rendering resolution, it's really pushing this thing to the end with its capabilities, with the power. So I think 720p would be a better solution. And oh man, I'm trying to fix this freaking overall controller problem, because pressing right it will also switch to my different camera. But one of the cool things you can actually do with these, let's say, cheaper mini PCs, you can upscale PlayStation 1. So if you just want to revisit it and you don't have the horrible or native resolution, we do have the option to all the way up to 720p. Take consideration depending on what kind of emulator and game you're running, maybe can even push it to 1080p. That is absolutely great to see what you can actually all do with this, and it looks absolutely stunning, to be honest, for an old game like this. So next up, PlayStation 2, and also this seems to be running fine. It is on native resolution. Upscaling is not going to be a great idea. I do see some screen tearing going on, so maybe we can fix that in the menu at the back end. But so far, it's absolutely great that we can see some, let's say, action on PlayStation 2 with just a mini PC of this price range. And that's the thing I just find very exciting, that we have so many mini PCs coming out of the market. There were actually e-waste, but you can just play so many cool things with. So like I mentioned before, if you're going to be slapping an SSD in here or an NVMe, you're installing some Batocera, you can play all the way up to PlayStation 2 without any problem. Of course, depending on what kind of game you actually go to be playing again, because some games are a little bit more demanding than the other one. But this i5 I think can run most of the games. But if you want to look into PlayStation 3, this is absolutely one of those downsides. I mean, particularly when it comes to, let's say, the loading times. The powerful CPUs will handle this so much faster. It's time to get yourself a cup of tea. But what I noticed when it comes to PlayStation 3 emulation, I do see that it stutters all the time. And the overall performance you're getting in here is okay. It's still playable with some couple of games. But you can see with PlayStation 3, here we're finding his, let's say, absolutely like limitations. And again, if you're having two-dimensional games and stuff like that, that will work just fine most of the time. But this is not really playable to a certain point. Some parts are absolutely like nice looking, but you can just actually see when he's moving that it is like having a lot of screen tearing and doesn't run really smooth. Another system I wanted to see running is the PlayStation Portable. With 1080p rendering resolution, we do have some overall great performance. If this is going to be handling 4K, yeah, it's going to be squeezing out a lot of the CPU. But in the end, when you're looking at this, with this GPU-CPU combination, 1080p is absolutely great. So let's try this again, and now on 4K rendering resolution. And no problem whatsoever, so it's absolutely great to see. Of course, if having a God of War, there we're having maybe a little bit of a problem with the 4K rendering resolution, so you can always tweak for a certain game. It's absolutely great to see that we can just play all of these amazing games on higher resolutions on such a cheap device that we're using now. That promise a lot of cool things for in the future. And I mean particularly when some of these PCs are getting cheaper, and the fastest one out there, you're getting even, let's say, more possibilities for emulation. Do you have some glitching or something? It looks like glitching, but no, I think it is supposed to be. Well, so let's see what we can do with GameCube. So also it has been set to the native resolution, no upscaling. I just wanted to check out simply this because we don't have a lot of power when it comes to these older CPU GPU combinations. But it's absolutely amazing to see that we can actually just play some GameCube on this. Of course, we can also mess around with a couple of games. If we have two-dimensional games, we can maybe squeeze it all up. But so far, so good. An overall great performance. And I can just enjoy myself some. F-Zero GX, one of my favorite games to play on the GameCube. It's, by the way, my first game that I actually ever bought. But for preservation, this is going to be absolutely awesome, because now we can actually enjoy those Xbox classic games, all of them. I really love to see myself playing some Kung Fu Chaos on this. Yeah, my original Xbox seems to be still working, but if I'm not going to be recapping these things in like the near future, we're having a lot of issues. And a couple of my Xboxes already died off, by the way. But seems to be working great on such an, let's say, low-powered older PC when it comes to emulation. So when it comes to the Dreamcast, I've been, let's say, tweaking around with it, but I've noticed when we're actually trying to get 4K rendering resolution, this mini PC doesn't like doing that. So I think the max for Sega Dreamcast will be 1080p. So you can just see that with different systems, we do have some very interesting, let's say, performance. So this is not like the most powerful version out there, but still, they're like a lot of fun. Okay, what we're going to be doing is switching. Let's put this thing aside and let's switch to the newer version. And yeah, I think it looks so much better when it comes to the older version, but specification wise and how this works. Like every single review almost, I'm going to be connecting my Xbox 360 controller. You can find those on AliExpress very cheap, the aftermarket ones, and they work great. So the device has been plugged in, booted up into Batacera, and yeah, you can do a different configuration. That we can have like this plug and play where we can switch between windows. So if you're going to be removing and reboot it, you get into Windows, plugging it back in, and if you set it to USB boot first, you will have the Batacera drive set up. But let's do a chit chat about it and what can we actually play. Like always, we do have this freaking annoying audio issue. So what we're going to be needing to do is going to the system settings, and in here we're finding the audio output. And it looks like it has been set to the right version. And I forgot to open up the speaker volume. Okay, brain fart wicked. Okay, so next up, let's take a close look at system settings again. Then we're going to be information. And let's zoom in. And let's talk about the specifications. Version, that's not what we're going to be checking out. So first of all, 29 Celsius is quite good for this HP, because I've been looking into different mini PCs, most of them getting up 45 Celsius. So cooling wise, this thing is absolutely great. We're using over here the i5, the 6th generation 6600T CPU. And the reason why I went for this particular model, because yeah, it was just really cheap to buy. And if you're getting like an 8th generation, somehow they're like asking 150, even over 200 freaking dollars here. It's like nuts. However, we have a CPU count of 4, or at least like CPU number or the cores itself. So the overall specs are not bad, but let's see how far we can push it with some emulation itself. So we're going to be looking into the list of the kind of games you can play. It's absolutely nuts. However, I just want to check out some Tekken, MAME, stuff like that, because that doesn't run on cheap boxes most of the time. And I'm also going to be deep diving into some PlayStation stuff. What can we upscale with the, for example, the N64? Can we upscale it to 1080p or maybe even 4K? Because this i5 is a little bit older, but it is still maybe powerful enough to run our favorite games in also higher resolution. Of course, we do have some limitations, but we're going to be deep diving and finding them here. So when it comes to playing some Killer Instinct, this runs perfectly without no problem whatsoever. I can still remember that I actually played this on the Xbox Classic for the first time in emulation, but now having the option with just a cheap mini PC to actually run this. However, you can even run this with, let's say, lower end mini PCs like a dual core or a very old, let's say, 2nd generation i5. So Mortal Kombat 1 was, for example, one of my favorite games to actually test on those, let's say, Pandora's boxes, simply because this was like the ultimate game we could actually test. But it runs without, of course, without any problem, like thousands of other games on a mini PC with Botesera. So if you just want to get into some MAME gaming, this is just a very cool way to actually do that. Every single Gamebox review I mentioned that we couldn't play Tekken, the MAME version. Most of the time only the PlayStation version, where that game is just great as it is. However, the MAME is just a real arcade version and this runs perfectly. So, but let's move into some other Tekken games like Tekken Tag, because that was a system that could not even play it on many Super Console X PC. And back in the day when I actually started making these videos about them, like the emulation in general. But at this point we don't have any issue whatsoever when it comes for playing the MAME Tekken games. Even the Tekken Tag runs full speed, no problem whatsoever. And I also tried it on, let's say, some basic systems like an old i5, and they even had the option to actually run this. So this is not a problem for this CPU i5 6th generation. Yeah, so when it comes to the Panasonic 3DO, this is another system that is difficult to emulate on those Android game boxes with EmuElec most of the time. And another thing I noticed that this is one of those mini PCs that does no problem whatsoever. Did notice some differences between the loading time, because some PC is a little bit faster than the other one. But beside that, when it comes to emulation performance, we can actually run this game like Return to Fire. Let's see if it dips down. I must point out that I'm not running the latest emulator when it comes to this, but besides that, it seems to be working just fine as it is. So this is one of those many games I also wanted to try out besides playing on my original 3DO. It's just fun to emulate and to have this on the collection, and this seems to be running just fine now. But moving into some more emulators like the Atomic Wave do have great emulation performance. Here, it doesn't even matter which game I'm going to be playing. And I find this Demolish Fish such a weird game. But beside that, it is going to be a great overall experience with Atomic Wave, Dolphin Blue and other games. And with arcade, there's so far not I think a lot of restrictions when it comes to that. Sorry. But let's switch between drives and let's hook up a new drive of Botesera to get the best emulators and best performance. Because sometimes getting a newer emulator and also a Botesera version, we can have, let's say, the overall better performance on also old school chips, where this is still in 6000 model. But let's mess with some rendering resolution, because the Dreamcast will run just fine. Holding the A button with this version, we can get into the advanced game option. This way you can also use select if I'm saying it correctly. And yeah, in here we can finding the rendering resolution, and the rendering resolution has been set to 4K, but it is not going to be in great overall experience. So let's go to 1920 by 4040 when it comes to that, and I would not be surprised that we do have an overall great emulation performance there. So I did notice with starting up the game, I did see some stuttering here and there. So when it comes to the overall performance, I think the Full HD is the maximum we can push this thing because of the 6th generation i5. But the question remains, of course, if you want to get into some Dreamcast emulation, do you think it's really worth it, the upscaling itself? And that is one of the things you need to ask, because there are many different cheap devices now that can actually play Dreamcast without any problem whatsoever. So you can just pay a fraction of the cost. But again, if you just want to have like some overall good emulation with a little bit of upscaling, a mini PC like this is just the way to go to. So moving on into some Sega Saturn. Having been set to 1080p with Die Hard, the arcade, it was also a very difficult game to emulate and had a lot of struggles with those cheaper game boxes, but just actually cool that we can just play this and even have the option with a little bit of upscaling using the Yaba Shinshiro emulator. And also you can also tweak a little bit with it, what kind of emulator works best for you. But so far I can see this is just great. I will not even push it a little bit further. Yeah, we can try 2K, 4K and whatsoever, but it's highly possible it's going to be stuttering like crazy, because then we're going to be pushing it over its limits and having not the experience we actually want. And 1080p looks kind of good when it comes to that. 1080p with N64. So we do have a little bit more power than the cheap ones I've been checking out. So I mean, particularly when it comes to this old school, I think I even tested out an i5 with a 2nd generation and a dual core. And they had the option to actually play some N64, but most of them just on native and sometimes 480 depending on the game. But now we can even play this on 1080p upscale, but you can see it just froze. Okay, that's kind of cool to see. Can we reset it? No. Oh, there we go, there we go, there we go. Okay, wait, what? I don't know what's going on. We could also... Okay, it's not going well. So let's reset it and let's try that again with a different setting, because that was not the way how we wanted to play. So what we can actually do is going all the way up to all the settings. Let's put it to 960 by 720 and let's try that again. And that is what I mean when it comes to tweaking, you know. This is just it's absolutely crazy if you think about it. We can play so many different games on one freaking PC. However, you always need to do a little bit of tweaking. So what is the best option for your setup? Besides having the different Intel chipsets with different generations. Okay, so let's get into it. If it still freezes, it means it's not something to do with the rendering resolution. Yeah, so that runs a little bit better. Okay, a little bit better. It doesn't even freeze now. Can be an accident, but I think it not. It got a message from shaders, something went completely wrong. But this is one of the many things that you need to take note. Yeah, just get a little bit of knowledge about Batocera and just sometimes messing with it if you have some problems with your favorite game. But we still needed to try another N64 game. So if let's say the correct resolution was 920 by 4040, but you can see that it actually freezes. So this is not going to be an overall good experience upscaling it to so far. You can see it freezes, but just do a little bit of a gameplay. No, this is just not the way how you want to go. It does look absolutely amazing on higher resolution when it comes to that, but no. We push it to the maximum level. But let's get into some GameCube with 1080p upscaled resolution, and whoa, this looks absolutely great. It's just awesome to see that we can do a little bit of upscaling of GameCube at this point. And with some tweaking, different games, we have different results. So let's say if you have an F-Zero X, it's possible you can only render that on 480 or 720p. Just want to give like a random game I love to play, Soul Calibur, I love this franchise. And yep, this looks great. And maybe you can do a little bit of more tweaking, getting even better result with rendering resolutions. But so far, I think this is just great, and this is just a great balance, but having a stable 60 frames per second. So with the PlayStation part, PlayStation 1 4K rendering resolution. So that is the highest I have been on, let's say, these cheaper game box emulation Batocera mini PCs. And you can just actually see that the i5 6th generation seems to be handling it just fine. So with a lot of, let's say, dual cores and old i5s, we had like 1080p resolution. And so for PlayStation 1, there are a lot of game boxes out there that can just be on native resolution and plays perfectly with no problem whatsoever. We're combining this with the DuckStation. So the result can be slightly different if you're going to be using a different emulator, but performance is just amazing. 4K render resolution, so if you want to experience the old school PlayStation games in a different settings, yeah, this is going to be absolutely great. Moving up to the PlayStation 2, we're having rendering resolution of 1080p. So not only we can even play PlayStation 2, we even have the option to upscale it to 1080p. And having some overall good performance. Of course, if you want to, you can also get into the 2K or some other crazy resolutions, but I just want to choose the safe route to see if we can have like PlayStation 2 on some overall perfect emulation. It depends also what kind of games you're playing. God of War is slightly more difficult to emulate, so we're going to be needing maybe a little bit tweaking there. But most games, what you can just actually see, this runs on great on the 4K resolution. By the way, I'm getting my ass kicked over here. The first problem we're having when having an older CPU and not a lot of cores to have to work with emulation. And with PlayStation 3 we will see that it's going to be like a very long time when the game is actually loaded in. I've been testing it on AMD Ryzen's i9s, and those are like super fast and loading times are sometimes even instant. So where we do have overall maybe good emulation, the loading times can be absolutely a horrible thing. So let's grab ourselves something to drink in the meantime. But actually getting into the game, you can see we do have overall great performance. So also the more demanding games, that is going to be a tweaking situation. We don't need to do any craziness when it comes to filtering whatsoever, because this is just pushing this device to the limit. But it's actually cool to see that we can play some PlayStation 3 games on an older i5. But so far so good. And I'm only testing out one single game, but we can also maybe do a deep dive into the future with multiple games to see what the performance are. But for such an, let's say, old mini PC, this is just crazy. So PlayStation Portable, it's not disappointing. We have 4K rendering resolution. The games still look really, how would I say that? Low pixelated, not really detailed. But it's kind of cool to see that we can play 4K resolution. I've been trying 10 times, that is even possible, but that is too much. So take consideration how newer the Intel chip in the inside, how more expensive the HP ProDesk will be. So I was actually using this older version because it was not expensive at all, and you can do some really cool emulation. But the biggest surprise actually was when I was getting this one, the Elite ProDesk. Because the Elite ProDesk, oh yeah, you can do some pretty cool things with this. Thanks to the AMD Ryzen 1st generation, we can do some upscaling and some other cool stuff. So this video isn't sponsored by Highway Computers, but this is actually the place where I got it. So when you're going to be looking at some, let's say a local, actually mini PC reseller. So when I actually went to the desktop PCs on his website, and you can see we have all kinds of cool mini PC solutions. So we're having the ProDesk 400 over here that comes with an i3 8th generation. I would not really recommend getting something like this. So you know we have it in the Lenovo, but look at the price point, like 400 bucks with an AMD Ryzen 5 5650 GE. Another thing that is not really interesting. What is actually interesting, we also have a Lenovo M75Q Tiny. So this comes in an AMD Ryzen 5 3400 GA. But scrolling up, we have all kinds of different versions, even the older, like say old HP Elite. But if you're going to be looking further, you can here actually see the two models that I'm going to be really liking. So the one I actually picked up is the one for 90 euros over here. So it comes with the AMD Ryzen 5 2400 GE. It's way cheaper than the other one. It only has like 8 GB, so I asked him to slap in another 8 GB for dual channel, but you can just leave it as it is. It does comes with an inbuilt SSD. You can use it for Bodosera, or you can use Windows with emulation. It's all depending how you want to configure it, or just ask him to swap it out, remove the SSD and add some more memory. But you also have like the other version that's an AMD Ryzen 3 2200 GE, and this is like 70 bucks, but I think for the difference, I would always go for the 90 bucks version. The machine is ready to go, and there are tutorials out there how you need to set up Bodosera and everything, because some of the PCs, particularly the HP and the Dells, can be a little bit of a pain in the ass when it comes for the secure boot, and some settings that you need to disable for actually getting the boot up into Bodosera. But when done, man, you're presented with the freaking all kinds of different platforms that you can add to the device. Of course, I already mentioned at the beginning of this video, we're going to be having a low budget situation with this tiny form factor, meaning that we do have some limitation, particularly when it comes to upscaling. You know, it's pretty cool because we can play 8-bit, 16-bit, and there's even an option to add PlayStation 3, but take consideration, it's going to be a hit or miss situation over here. So we're going to be doing a deep dive into this, but first let's do a little bit of a chit chat about system settings, and we're going to be into the information. Because in here we're going to be finding what kind of HP EliteDesk is it actually, and what kind of power are we running today? So what we're getting actually is the HP EliteDesk 705 G4DM 35 watts. So the system is running on certain Linux, but that's not important. What is important, what kind of max frequency do we have for the GPU at this point? And of course, thanks to the AMD Ryzen 3 Pro 2200 GA, with Radeon Vega graphics, it's like the most powerful, let's say, onboard GPU, but this thing is able to actually run, like say, and upscale cool things. So yeah, 36 Celsius when it comes to the temperature, so that's pretty sweet, and that's one of the things I just love about this tiny form factor. But yeah, you can actually see like secure boot has been disabled. So that's actually it, and you know, this is going to be a lot of fun. So let's just deep dive into some stuff, and you know, let's have some overall fun with some game systems and see what we can do. So like you see over here with Bodosera, there are some tutorials out there that also like the option to even add Steam. Compatibility is of course a different story, but you know, I understand there's even some Windows support for it, and I think I'm guessing they are using Proton, and in there we can actually like add games from Windows. And again, like it's going to be a compatibility situation, but still we do have like a lot of potential there too. Menu wise, we can all change this out, so I don't want to go too in depth about this. But you know, when you're going to be looking into Panasonic 3DO with the Return Fire and other games, yep, we can actually play a lot of stuff. So actually I do have audio. It's a freaking miracle. The reason why I'm saying this is that I have seen so many problems with this. Going into the sound settings, we can adjust the volume. That's not a problem. But where we do have like sometimes problems that it doesn't actually let you hear the overall music because the output hasn't been set to the right configuration. And I think in here we're going to be having all kinds of stuff that you can mess around with if you want to go into aspect ratio and everything. We can deep dive into the system over here and just mess around with the system settings, everything. And in here we can just go into the interface mode, change up things. So you can see the audio output has been set to the right, like say output, but it's actually using the internal speaker now. So yeah, that's kind of weird. And this is actually one of the ways that you need to mess around with it. I can hear the audio. I think it's not even noticeable on, yeah, it's not even noticeable over here. So let's go with HDMI 2. Yeah, I now do hear it. Okay, great. So it's one of the things that we need to fix, and there are a couple of things that we need to mess around with if you have no audio. Just want to implement it in the video itself. So one of the things you need to take into consideration if you're going to be having an onboard GPU, we're not going to be having the real power or the raw power like a normal GPU. So, but what you can actually mess around with if you're holding the A button, or to be in this case, go into advanced game option. We can change out what kind of emulator you want to go with, or you're just leaving it on auto. And underneath, we're going to actually mess around with, let's say, emulator if you have some problems, or if you're going to be messing around with, let's say, I want to do a little bit of an upscaling, you can actually change it all out here. We can even do the smooth games filtering if you want to. And this is one of the many things that you can deep dive into. So out of the box, mostly I leave it like on auto. And that's it. And if you have problems, you can switch to different emulators, see if you're going to be having the right overall emulation performance. So that's one of the things you need to tinker with, not only the upscaling, but also when it comes to, let's say, the emulator settings. With Sega Dreamcast, I'm going to be using the Redream emulator that comes with the Butter Sierra. And yeah, I can tell you that this runs pretty good, where Flycast had a little bit of problems. It's kind of weird because this is one of the things that you need to actually mess around with every single device if you're going to be setting it up, or you need to have, of course, the same situation, same setup, same hardware. But again, you will find a lot of limitation, but on native resolution, I must say that most of these things like Sega Dreamcast and Saturn will run just fine. So it's kind of funny that we're going to be running some simple MAME, and you can see that it is running on 56, let's say, frames per second. So that is not full speed, but it's just something to do with the overall configuration of the emulator itself. You know, and that's one of the things that we needed to tinker with. So let's go back, let's press the home button and start. Let's go back to the menu itself, and in here we're having Final Burn Neo. So if you go to the advanced options, we can just mess around with some other things, but you can see that we don't have overall just like control over the say separate emulators, because it's actually using Final Burn Neo. Yeah, so we cannot switch always inside of the menu itself, but what you need to do, let's say I'm going to MAME, we're going to be selecting the same game. And it's highly possible it will run so much better now. But in MAME, we can actually mess around with the emulator, because we do have like different versions of MAME itself. So let's see if it's going to be even booting up. I think it's been set up, because you see it was actually set to a favorite situation over here. Let's see, now it's running in way better speed. It's running on this weird 50, there we go, 60 frames per second. Oh, but it displays so much smoother. Well, let's say you do have like problems with MAME. Let's go back to the menu itself. So we do have the same situation with holding the B button or A, going to advanced game option. It has been set to auto. That can sometimes give problem, but we can switch to MAME or MAME 078 Plus or some other ones that is actually on here. But again, if it works with auto, just leave it as this. But it's one of the many things that you need to take consideration, particularly if you're going to be setting up these drives itself. But so far, when you're looking at a mini PC like this can just easily play all of simple, let's say, MAME Neo Geo games. And the overall emulation performance, I think it's absolutely enjoyable. I think an AMD Ryzen like this is just going to be something you're going to be needing for having like Sega Dreamcast emulation. Nowadays, we have like $30, $40 sticks that can just actually play these games fine. Having EmuElec, and you can just mess around with it like I showed you before. But that's just like running pretty sweet. But again, AMD Ryzen versions, I just love them, particularly when it comes to the high-end emulation, and simple stuff, yeah, run just fine, man. So when it comes to the arcade part, let's do a quick overview of some Atomic Wave with the Dolphin Blue game. I've been testing this many times on different devices, and it doesn't have any problem whatsoever with this particular system. Take note that you also need to set up certain files, and if you're going to be doing some wild, crazy, wicked thing, you can even upscale it with some of the newer emulators. But native resolution, it works perfectly, no problem whatsoever. And this is absolutely a very cool system. Not a lot of games, but the games like Dolphin Blue are a lot of fun. This feels just like a Metal Slug clone for me. Time for some NES part, and yeah, there are so many actually different ways we can just play this. A little bit of a bummer that automatically have it set to widescreen shenanigans, so that's unfortunate. But beside that, emulation is just great. You can implement different formats, but also bezels, everything can be changed out if you want to. But I already mentioned before, like 8-bit, 16-bit stuff, we have many different ways. Also the cheap game sticks, for like a couple of dollars, can be playing this. I think there are even dedicated NES plug-and-play devices that kind of cool features. But the same goes for the Super NES. This runs without any problem whatsoever. It's kind of interesting to see that when it comes to the aspect ratio, it's kind of weird because we do have like a massive bezel, or almost a massive bezel around it. Like particularly when it comes to the left and the right part and the bottom part. But also here we have no problem whatsoever. And if you just want to revisit these old school games, it's going to be a blast to the past. I'm just playing now with an Xbox 360 controller. That plays quite nice. I can still remember playing this game. A friend of mine had this on a multi-game card. Yep, they had multi-game cards, like a 4-in-1 it was, or 6-in-1. A very small one, but it was such a cool game. Turbo mode, yeah! Another system I have been seeing a lot of, let's say, cheap game boxes is Panasonic Video. And none of them, or most of them, are not able to run video on full 60 frames per second. Where a game like Road Rash actually playing now, this is a game that has been ported to many different systems. So don't really need this to have it running on the Panasonic Video, but I think it's quite a good port when you're looking at it. Woohoo! See me flying! Oh. Yeah, he was walking back to his freaking motorcycle. Oh boy. That was one of the parts I really hated about this game. There we go. Woohoo! Personally, I never had an MSX, but this is the MSX1 with some 9042. So I do wonder how many people watching this actually had the MSX computer, because this is a completely different time area. I cannot even recall seeing this in some stores, but going back to this, it's kind of fun. And looking through the list, I did notice a lot of cool games, but of course some games are ported to the NES and many other systems, or we just have like the full original arcade versions. So I think it's just going to be like some pure nostalgia thing going on over here. Contra has been put into this list called MSX2 Plus, where I am just going to be honest, I'm completely new with MSX, so I have no idea what's going on. But this Contra is not going to be one of my favorite games actually to play, because what's happening? Like, you're just stuck in this. I do wonder if this is the original MSX, or why this calling the MSX2 Plus. It makes no sense whatsoever. Oh, that's actually how it works. Oh, I was just thinking, why doesn't the freaking stage move? But when we're going to be looking into some more old school stuff, yeah, the PC Engine is one of those systems. We can play it on many different, let's say, game sticks nowadays, so that's not going to be the reason you need to build a PC like this. But this has so many very cool games. So when I understand of what's like in the time era of the 8-bit systems, but this thing has so many cool games that looks just amazing. And Jackie Chan's was one of those games I was playing. I discovered it, like I say, many years ago. And since then I'm just going to be always playing this. How does it actually work? We're going to be holding the A button. So if you're going to be into the N64 list, holding the A button now, then we're going to be having the advanced options. At the right over here we get an extra menu, advanced game options. We have different kind of emulators that we can implement. But some of them we can even do a little bit of an upscaling, and that's what we're going to be doing today. So rendering resolution has been set to 720p. We're just going to be looking into different emulator, let's say options, and see how far we can push it. And I think we do have like some really cool things going on over here thanks to the GPU that comes with the AMD. This may be better than the Intel one. So first off, let's do a little bit of rendering resolution of 1920 by 4040 if I'm saying it correctly. So it's going to be some next level when it comes to that. See how far we can push it and do we have a stable frame rate. Because of course we can do a little bit tweaking, we can even do a little bit more upscaling, but also downscale everything. However, let's get into some gaming. So a native resolution, this runs on many different mini PCs nowadays, so that's absolutely awesome. But one of the more appealing things with this AMD mini PC, that we do have like upscaling, and the 64 looks absolutely great. You can see that we have some minor stutters, but not to the point that it's going to be making this game unplayable. So Cruise USA is one of those test bench games that struggles on so many cheap game boxes. But let's go into some more gaming, because in this part I just want to do a little bit of an, let's say, different games on the same systems, because some of the games have like a slightly different overall result. I do see a little bit of stuttering going on left and right, the same with Cruise in the USA. But let's deep dive into some GoldenEye action. You can see it struggles, particularly in the beginning. But getting through the game, you see the game is just playable on these higher resolutions. So if you want to have no, let's say, stuttering going on, what you can actually do is just like lower it in resolution, less quality, but we have like the better performance. So that's something you should, like, say, consider for yourself. Whoa, see, and that's exactly what I mean. So with this resolution of 920 by 4040 is absolutely pushing the device itself to a limit. We have been doing all kinds of, let's say, upscaling and different mini PCs. Normally we only have the options where we're having, let's say, Intel with a powerful GPU combined, and we're having the options. However, for this really old mini PC, for that amount of money you're paying for it, it's crazy. Let's move on to the N64DD. In other words, this is a system that has been, let's say, tested out on many, let's say, cheaper game boxes. But with this, we're going to be putting it on 4 times high quality resolution. We do have the same kind of result when it comes to, let's say, the performance. We do have some weird stuff going on with the, let's say, overall quality of, let's say, the details, but getting into the game, also here. And so far I've seen like the higher, like, say, overall upscaling what I can do, but you can see also the same result with GoldenEye. I do have overall good emulation performance, where we do have like some minor hiccups. With the Dolphin emulator and some GameCube, I just want to do something completely crazy. Where this is a really old specification of a CPU-GPU combination, we're going to be trying some 4K rendering resolution. But you can just hear with Soul Calibur that it struggles big time. It is playable to a certain level, but you know, this is one of those great examples, dipping to 45 frames per second. So what you're going to be needing to do is just lower it everything, maybe make it on 2K, or if you have like a little bit better luck, you need to have 1080p. But if you're going to be looking into some more demanding stuff, then we're going to be needing, let's say, 1080p. So let's switch to another game and I'll give you an example what I exactly mean with this. A great example is going to be testing out F-Zero GX. By the way, one of my favorite games to test out and also to play actually on my GameCube. So now we're going to be putting it on 1080p rendering resolution. Try 2K or 4040p and stuff like that, doesn't work at all. And we didn't have like overall great performance. However, 1080p upscaled F-Zero GX on this old PC seems to be running just fine. So let's get into the game. Let's skip the intro. And I think it's absolutely an overall amazing performance, having even upscaling options with such an, let's say, low-powered old school mini PC. Where I am just Team Intel when it comes to play, say, having a CPU in my Simon PC. I'm always like flabbergasted how good AMD Ryzen is. Even with this prehistoric version, the performance is crazy. If you're looking at the price you're paying for these mini PCs and having the option to do so many cool things. 1080p F-Zero GX, this meaning if you're going to have maybe a two-dimensional game, you can maybe do a little bit of 2K or maybe even 4K rendering resolution. But of course, you need to look into it yourself, do a little bit of tweaking for your favorite game to get the overall best performance out of this machine. But let's get into the PlayStation part. So start off with some PlayStation 1. And what I love about this machine, that we do have the option for 4K rendering resolution, making this PlayStation 1 game through the dock station looking amazing. And I think that is one of those really appealing things. If you're a big fan of the PlayStation 1 games, and you want to experience those old games in a 4K rendering resolution, you can actually do that in such a low budget, cheap way. So what you can also do is getting into, let's say, higher settings if you just want to tinker with it. Same story, like I told you a couple of times now, is that depending on what kind of game you want to play, maybe the two-dimensional game is even less demanding and we can have it higher than 4K. But so far this looks just great. And that's one of the more appealing things when it comes to a PC. And then we can do it with a low budget product like this particular old school AMD Ryzen. And this makes me personally really exciting. Moving on to the PlayStation 2, we have great performance with 1080p rendering resolution. And yep, you can do tweaking here and there, but I am quite satisfied with such an overall good performance with a Tekken 5. The game has never been looked so great, and then for such a low-powered mini PC. And that, I think it has to do thanks to the GPU, because this gives us so many cool new upscaling options. Dolphin, but also the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 and many other systems.
Round 2. Fight.
But let's try another game, a two-dimensional fighting game, and yep, we're having over here 4K rendering resolution with PlayStation. So I had the option to do this with Tekken, but I didn't want to do this because I know the two-dimensional stuff is less demanding. But you can see full 4K render resolution, great performance on this mini PC. And that's what I exactly mean. We need to do tweaking and tweak your favorite game to a certain level that makes it still playable and look amazing. But how about PlayStation 3? I think if you're going to be having these low budget or very old, say mini PCs, some of them have the option to actually play. But let's start about the loading times. Because due over the course we're having over here, it takes sometimes forever to load up a couple of games. So in this case, I'm going to grab myself something to drink. And after a couple of times of trying to boot up the game, because in the loading it just froze up. But let's get into the gaming and let's see how the overall gameplay will be. But the overall emulation performance is surprisingly good. However, we do have very long loading times getting into the games, of course depending how big the game is itself. But with this game, yeah, we did have a little bit of a problem with that. However, in the game everything loads fast. But when it comes to, let's say, playing and just want to have overall better experience in PlayStation 3, you need to take consideration to get a more powerful PC itself. I've been trying on many different AMD Ryzen ones. And yeah, with more cores and more threads, we have like overall so many better performance. But of course, with a low power device like this, it's just amazing that we can actually even play PlayStation 3 now. And it makes this mini PC, beside the overall upscaling, very cool. Point out that we're just using the original native resolution now, as this was intended to play on the PlayStation. No with cool things added to it, because I think this is the maximum we can expect from such a low power device. So where Die Hard is actually a quite difficult one to play and emulate, we can do it on this mini PC without any problem whatsoever. So if Die Hard Strategy works, there are many games that will run just fine. And think about if you're going to be using a two-dimensional game, that will be maybe have the option, if it was possible in emulator, we can even do it a little bit, maybe upscaling to higher resolutions. But the Sega Saturn runs absolutely awesome through the Yamaha Zero emulator. So we had 4K rendering resolution with the Sega Saturn, but how about when it comes to the Sega Dreamcast? So let's push this thing. We see some dips now at this moment, but let's get into the gameplay and see how the overall gameplay is. Already has some dips, 40 over here. Ooh. But this is just fun to experiment with it. For 4K Dreamcast, it's just too much. So we need to do a little bit of a lowering of the resolution. So for emulation, the EliteDesk is one of the best ones because of the AMD Ryzen. The onboard GPU has absolutely so much more potential than the Intel ones. But again, it depends on how much you need to pay for. If you can pick up an Intel one and you just want to play some basic emulation, hey, it's just fine. Let me know in the comments, what do you think? Where can you actually find them for cheap? Because I noticed in my country, I can find all of these things for not a lot of money because there was not like a lot of demand for these things. Let me know in the comments, and it would be great to see you in the next video.